The ultimatum and the silence. The Corvette Ascendancy had never lost a war. For 10,000 years, its banners had risen over conquered moons, shattered capitals, and the bones of civilizations that had dared to resist. Species that once ruled entire star clusters now paid tribute in silence, their histories rewritten, their pride buried beneath layers of imperial law. The Ascendancy did not simply conquer worlds. It erased the memory of anyone who had ever stood against it. So when the small, blue world called Earth refused the Ascendancy's final ultimatum, the reaction across 1,000 star systems was not fear. It was disbelief. Inside the Grand Assembly of Veyron Station, a colossal ring of metal and light suspended above a dead gas giant, delegates from dozens of species watched the transmission arrive. High Marshal Threx Vaughn stood before the holographic display, his silver eyes narrowed beneath a crown of ceremonial spines. Behind him stretched the shadow of the Ascendancy's authority, a fleet so vast that entire star charts had to be redrawn to hold its formations. Humanity has been given generous terms, Threx said, his voice a low, metallic hum that echoed through the chamber. Surrender their weapons. Open their shipyards. Submit their world to Ascendancy law. In exchange, they may live. A murmur rippled through the assembly. Every species present understood what refusal meant. The Ascendancy did not negotiate twice. The reply came moments later, broadcast from a modest building in a coastal city on Earth. There were no soldiers standing behind podiums, no displays of military might, no desperate pleas for mercy. Instead, a single woman stepped forward, not a general, not a president, but a quiet, steady voice representing billions. Her name was Director Naomi Kessel, head of Earth's unified command. She did not raise her voice. She did not posture. She simply looked into the camera and spoke 7 words that would echo across the galaxy for generations. We already know how this ends. The transmission cut to black. For a long moment, no one in the Grand Assembly spoke. Then laughter broke out, nervous at first, then confident, then dismissive. Analysts across a dozen worlds began calculating Earth's inevitable collapse. Betting pools opened on Ascendancy media networks, wagering not on whether humanity would fall, but how quickly. Meanwhile, on Earth, something far stranger was happening. There were no evacuation orders. No panicked crowds filled the streets. Farmers still worked their fields beneath quiet skies. Children still walked to school. If humanity was afraid, it did not show. If humanity had a plan, it did not announce it. Deep beneath the surface, however, the planet had begun to breathe differently. In the frozen wastes of Antarctica, ice sheets thicker than mountains groaned as ancient machinery stirred beneath them for the first time in over a century. Along the ocean floor of the Pacific, pressure-sealed doors the size of small cities began sliding open, revealing corridors that led to nothing anyone alive had ever seen. On the far side of the moon, hidden from Earth's view, structures buried since before most nations had stopped drawing borders in blood began drawing power from reactors older than living memory. None of it showed up on any Ascendancy scan. None of it triggered a single alert. 3 days after Earth's refusal, the Ascendancy's first expeditionary fleet crossed into the outer edge of the Sol system. 60,000 warships moved in perfect formation, their hulls reflecting the pale light of a distant sun. At the head of the fleet, aboard the flagship Voice of Judgment, Fleet Marshal Draith Solon studied the empty space ahead of him with growing curiosity. No patrols, his tactical officer reported. No automated defense platforms. No response to our approach. They're hiding, another officer offered. Or they've already surrendered internally and are too afraid to say so. Draith said nothing. He had conquered 11 worlds in his career. He had seen fear before, the kind that froze fleets in place, the kind that sent commanders fleeing into asteroid fields, the kind that ended in mass surrender broadcasts within hours. This felt different. This felt like patience. The fleet advanced past the outer planets. Neptune, silent. Uranus, empty. Saturn's rings drifted undisturbed, its moons showing no sign of military presence. Jupiter, the largest planet in the system, revealed nothing but quiet orbital stations that broadcasted ordinary civilian traffic. Drath's unease grew with every passing hour, though he kept his expression carefully neutral for his crew. Then, as the fleet crossed the asteroid belt separating the outer system from Earth's inner worlds, sensors flickered. "Marshal, I'm reading energy signatures," the tactical officer said, leaning toward his console. "Thousands of them. Scattered across the belt." They appeared for less than 2 seconds and vanished. Drath turned toward the display. Faint clusters of light blinked across a star map, scattered among countless asteroids, then disappeared entirely, as if they had never existed at all. "Mining operations," suggested one officer. "Sensor interference from mineral density," offered another. Drath said nothing for a long moment, his eyes fixed on the emptiness where the signals had been. Something about the pattern bothered him, not the strength of the readings, but their precision. Each flicker had activated and deactivated at almost the exact same instant, as if choreographed rather than accidental. "Continue advancing," he finally ordered. "But increase sensor sensitivity across the fleet. I want to know if anything moves within that belt again." The fleet pressed onward, leaving the silent asteroid field behind. Ahead, Earth glowed faintly blue against the black of space, small and seemingly defenseless, exactly as every report had promised. What Drath Solon did not know, what no ascendancy scanner, satellite, or spy network had ever detected, was that the flickers in the asteroid belt were not malfunctions. They were tests. Calibration signals from thousands of dormant shipyards checking their targeting arrays one final time before the moment they had waited over a century to reach finally arrived. Beneath the ice of Antarctica, beneath the ocean floor, beneath the dust of the moon, humanity's real answer to the Ascendantian ultimatum was almost ready to speak. Not with words. Not with surrender broadcasts or desperate pleas. But with the quiet, terrifying scale of a promise kept in secret for longer than most civilizations had existed. As the voice of judgment entered orbit above Earth, Drath Solon allowed himself, for the first time since the fleet had crossed into the system, a flicker of doubt. Somewhere below him, humanity was still not sending distress signals. It was not fleeing. It was not begging. It was waiting. And far beneath the surface of a planet the galaxy had underestimated for the last time, the first shipyard doors began, at last, to open. The awakening and the storm. The order came without ceremony. No grand speech, no rallying cry broadcast to the people of Earth. Director Naomi Kessel simply entered a small, unremarkable room beneath the Geneva Command Complex, sat before a terminal that had not been activated in over 100 years, and spoke a single phrase into the silence. "Wake them up." Far beneath the surface of 3 worlds and 1 moon, ancient systems that had slept since before the first Ascendancy fleet had ever charted human space stirred back to life. 90 years earlier, after humanity's first quiet contact with the wider galaxy had ended in threats rather than welcome, a decision had been made, not by any single government, but by a coalition too determined and too disciplined to ever leak its secret. If the galaxy believed only in strength, then humanity would build strength beyond anything the galaxy had ever imagined, and it would do so in silence, patience, and total secrecy. Project Sentinel had never appeared in any public record. It had consumed a fraction of Earth's resources every year for nearly a century, hidden inside budgets no one thought to question, buried beneath mining operations, disguised as scientific research, folded into forgotten infrastructure projects. Every shipyard had been built underground, undersea, or beneath lunar regolith, shielded from any scan the Ascendancy or any other power might someday send. Now, all at once, the silence broke. Beneath Antarctica, the first automated shipyard reported operational status. Then the second. Then the 10th. Reports flooded into Earth's command network faster than any human operator could read them, so an artificial intelligence built specifically for this moment took over instead, its voice calm and steady as it announced numbers that grew beyond comprehension. Shipyard Cluster 1, fully operational. Shipyard Cluster 2, fully operational. Total available reserve fleet, 412,000 vessels. Estimated completion of remaining reserve, 6 hours. Even Naomi Kessel, who had known the scale of the project for over a decade, felt her breath catch as the numbers climbed past 450,000, then approached 500,000 warships, more than every fleet in galactic history combined. Above Earth, Fleet Marshal Draith Solon had no idea what was rising beneath him. His fleet held orbit, awaiting the final surrender he still believed was only hours away. Then his sensors began screaming. Marshal, mass energy signatures detected across the entire system. Origin points, everywhere. The Moon. The asteroid belt. Beneath the surface of Earth itself. Draith stood, his silver eyes fixed on the display as thousands of new contacts bloomed across the star map, then tens of thousands, then more than any tactical system had ever been designed to track. Ships rose from beneath lunar craters in formations too perfect to be improvised. Vessels emerged from the asteroid belt in waves, their hulls sleek, their weapons already charged. Beneath the oceans of Earth itself, city-sized doors opened along the seafloor, releasing warships that had waited generations for this exact moment. That's not possible, one officer whispered. Marshal, our scans show over 300,000 vessels and rising. 400,000, another corrected moments later, his voice shaking. 450. Draith Solon, who had never once retreated in his career, felt something he had not experienced since childhood, genuine fear. All ships, defensive formation, he ordered, though even as the words left his mouth, he understood how meaningless they had become. The human fleet did not charge forward in chaotic waves. It moved with the discipline of a force that had spent a century preparing for this single engagement, coordinated by artificial intelligences and human commanders working in perfect unison. Ships fanned out in overlapping formations, cutting off every possible retreat vector before the Ascendancy fleet even understood it was surrounded. Admiral Elias Rourke, commanding the newly designated 1st Sentinel Fleet, watched the enemy formation scatter into confusion from the bridge of his flagship, the Steadfast Dawn. Beside him, his tactical officer read out enemy ship counts with a calm that belied the historic weight of the moment. Enemy fleet, 60,000 vessels, badly disorganized. Our forces outnumber them more than 8 to 1. Rourke allowed himself a brief, tired smile. Then let's make sure they understand exactly what they're facing. The battle that followed was less a war and more a demonstration. Ascendancy warships, designed to overwhelm through sheer numbers and reputation, found themselves surrounded by an enemy who matched their firepower and exceeded their numbers by a staggering margin. Human vessels moved with practiced precision, cutting off supply lines, disabling engines rather than destroying ships outright wherever possible, offering surrender terms broadcast in calm, steady voices rather than triumphant gloating. Draith Solon watched his formations collapse within the first hour, watched ship after ship either disabled or forced to stand down as human vessels closed every gap in his defenses. There was no cruelty in the human assault, no desire for slaughter, only overwhelming, disciplined resolve. Finally, recognizing the impossibility of his position, Draith opened a channel to the human flagship. This is Fleet Marshal Draith Solon of the Ascendancy 1st Expeditionary Fleet. I request terms. Admiral Rourke's reply came without hesitation, calm and measured. Power down your weapons. Your crews will not be harmed. Earth does not seek conquest. We only ask that the galaxy finally understand, this world will never again be asked to kneel. Word of the battle spread across 1,000 star systems within days. The Ascendancy, unbeaten for 10,000 years, had been stopped not by a stronger empire or an ancient alliance, but by a single world that had spent a century preparing in absolute silence, choosing patience over panic, discipline over despair. Director Naomi Kessel did not celebrate. She stood instead before the unified command, watching reports of the battle's end scroll across the screen, and thought of the words she had spoken to the galaxy only days before. We already know how this ends. For the first time in 10,000 years, an empire that had never once been forced to retreat found itself sending not a fleet of conquest, but a delegation of peace toward a small, blue world it had once dismissed as insignificant. Earth had not shouted its strength to the stars. It had built it in silence, protected it with patience, and revealed it only when the moment demanded everything it had. And as the wreckage of the first expeditionary fleet drifted quietly at the edge of the solar system, the rest of the galaxy finally understood a truth that would be remembered for generations to come. Some civilizations conquer through fear. Humanity had endured through resolve, and on the day it finally chose to stand, it stood with 500,000 warships, and the unshakable certainty that it would never kneel again.